In today's episode, we are going to talk about a very popular myth about suicide that's also super harmful. If you have ever heard something to the effect of, if they really wanted to, they would have done it already, then this episode is for you. Welcome to the Suicide Prevention Lady podcast, where we make intervention easy. I'm your host, Dr. Ricky Turner. I am a suicide intervention expert, but please take note, I am the thinky kind of doctor and not the medical professional. So please do not take anything in this podcast as medical advice. Everyone in my circle, whether it be friends, family, regardless, all know what I do and what I'm passionate about. I literally won't shut up about it. So the fact that people consistently feel safe saying some of these things to me just baffles me, honestly. And it tells me how big the problem really is. So, in no particular order, no particular person here specifically, I've had people say this to me. Someone who goes around the country and teaches people how to intervene with suicide and develops keynotes and training and workshops, all surrounded by mental health positive thinking, actions, etc. I remember the conversation I'm going to bring up today, that is the topic, very vividly, because I was floored that someone would say this to me. And it happens all the time. Honestly, it happens so much that sometimes I don't have the energy to actually be like, actually, that's not true. So when someone was telling me about their child being in a relationship with somebody who was suicidal, and they said, and they're using it as manipulation. And this person looked me dead in the eyes and said, yeah, if my child told me that they were suicidal, I would say, well, there's the door. Go do that then. And I was like, oh, please don't do that. And then they said, the only people who are actually suicidal are the ones that have already done it. If you're not on video where you can see my face, I'm sorry you're missing that. But my face speaks in subtitles. So I was like, there's so much to unpack right here. And in fairness, I did not even say anything at this point, because it wasn't the time. I knew I could not possibly get into this type of discussion when it was around. But it did give me the idea for this episode. So let's talk about that, because so many people believe this myth that if they really wanted to, number one, they wouldn't be telling anybody, they would just do it, or they would have done it already. They're just looking for attention or whatever. And I cannot tell you how wrong that this is. It's important to keep in mind when we're saying things like that. Number one, every single time that I do a keynote or a training of some sort, I poll the audience and we find out in the room anonymously what our experiences are with suicide. Almost universally, does not matter who I'm talking to. I can be talking to college leaders, faculty members. I can be talking to college students. I can be talking to high school, middle school students. I can be talking to workplace, corporate, whatever. It never fails that the numbers are circa this. 20% of the audience, roughly, has thought about suicide in the last year, as in considered taking their own life in the last year. 5 to 7% is generally what I see of people who are currently thinking about it or have thought about it in the last month. It's pervasive, okay? The odds of you saying this in front of someone who is currently considering suicide are very, very high. 1 in 20 people that you're around, essentially, is what you can expect. Saying things like that in front of them is harmful for a couple of reasons. Number one, you are not a safe person for them to talk to. Obviously, you are not going to believe them and you're going to shame them in some way. Maybe not even intentionally. Number two, it invalidates what they're going through. They feel less like they are a part of a group. They feel more alone. And it's just not correct. It's factually inaccurate. When we talk to people who have survived suicide attempts or who have considered suicide or whatever, overwhelmingly, we hear from them, I didn't really want to die. Didn't think I had any other option. They have exhausted a list of things that they have tried that they think are what is going to help them, and it's not. And so this is their last resort. This is what they want. Not what they want. Not what they want. Not what they want. This is their last resort. It's not what they want. They just don't have any more hope. That is why we can't say these things. When someone gets to the point that they are thinking about hurting themselves and they muster up the courage to tell somebody, you should be honored that they talked to you, that they felt safe talking to you, that they love you enough to bring this up to you. The other thing is so many people mask, and they don't tell anybody, they go out and they make people believe anyway that that is their persona and they're not really hurting, and they have everybody fooled. So when it happens, everyone's like, oh, I wish they would have just said something. I wish they would have reached out for help, blah, blah, blah. Well, if we're saying hurtful things, why would they? Why would they? If anybody is listening on here who has ever said this before, who has ever thought it before, who still believes it, number one, there's no judgment here. Okay. I'm not judging you for feeling this way. I can recognize pretty quickly that you've probably never been suicidal. And so you don't know. And we don't understand what we don't know, right? It's fine. But I would ask for you to be open-minded about what the possibilities are here. Is it possible that they really don't want to die, but they really feel like they cannot be happy any other way? This is the only relief from the pain. Is that possible? If yes, then let's show a little kindness and fix the words that we're saying around suicide. I hear all the time, oh, they're just doing that for attention. They're being manipulative, blah, 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 blah. I'm not saying that no one out there is doing this. I've seen it. I have seen people use suicide as a manipulation tactic. Absolutely. We'll do a different episode at a later time talking about boundaries related to suicide and what to do when somebody is manipulating due to suicide. It's the minority, okay? It's not most people. So when you have that thought, or when you have these type of things come up where it's a myth that you're believing, or it seems like it might be diminishing somebody else's experience, just take a deep breath and listen. Just listen. Let them speak and be there for them and listen. There's other episodes I have. You can go back to, I've got videos on TikTok, lots of resources. If somebody does open up to you about this, on how you can respond and do it in a way that isn't necessarily scary. I'm not going to say it's not scary because, you're dealing with somebody's life. I get that. But to take a pause and just listen to somebody when they talk, give them the space to feel however they want to feel, not tell them, here's what you need to do. Here's how you should feel. Nope, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. We're just letting them feel what they feel, letting them express what it is, having a shoulder to cry on, and being there for them, and helping get them to the help that they need. Because it's really hard sometimes. So if this podcast is helping you in any way, please leave a comment or a voice memo. I love to feature some of those in a future episode. You can email me, of course, comment on whatever social media platform you're on. Doesn't matter to me. I just like to hear from you guys, honestly. And of course, if you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and share. Let's use today's episode to educate the masses. So if this has been a myth that you have said or in the past, just make a quick post and be like, hey, did you know? Or did you know this myth about suicide? Or tag the podcast, or whatever. But just make a quick passive intervention post, if you remember last week's episode, but make a little post just about suicide prevention and calling out that this is a myth. You never know who is going to see that and it spark a thought or a change in behavior for them. Next week, we are going to talk about survivor's guilt and the complicated healing process after losing someone to suicide. Recently, just this last week, I did a keynote at a conference in Kentucky, and I had somebody come up afterwards to talk to me about what happens when you miss the signs, and it just inspired me to do a podcast about that. So that's what we're talking about next week. Until then, take care, and I'll see you next time where we continue to learn how to intervene with ease.